the documentary series, publicly available information, and more. And I even attempted to FOIA request the Chicago Police Department for documents relating to some of the cases that we're taking a more in-depth look at in this documentary. To say that they were the opposite of transparent with me is a complete understatement, but we'll get to that eventually. First, let's investigate just who the Chicago Strangler, this phantom, this untraceable killer or killers may be. Based on my personal analysis of publicly available data from the Murder Accountability Project and journalistic investigations, after running some of these questions and scenarios through AI myself, a pattern or a perpetrator profile slowly emerged from the shadows. According to all the publicly available information, the Chicago Strangler is more than likely a male individual or a small group of men operating independently or in loose coordination, given the statistical improbability of 51 separate perpetrators committing such strikingly similar crimes over 17 years in such small, overlapping areas in a very large city. This hypothesis aligns with Thomas Hargrove's algorithm, which flagged the clusters themselves due to low clearance rates, 74% of these crimes being unsolved, and the shared characteristics between the crimes and the victims, a feature seemingly uncommon in random homicides, which suggests a sort of calculated predation or targeting by someone or a group of people that possesses intimate, on-the-ground knowledge of Chicago's south and west sides. These people have street knowledge, they understand the streets, they feel the heartbeat of the streets, and they know how to find all the nooks and crannies so that they can find these victims, murder them, and slip away into the night undetected. The killer also may possess qualities of a domestic abuser, as strangulation is an intimate, hands-on method of killing often linked to prior violence against women, and a method that also allows the killer to escalate from domestic violence to murder without drawing immediate attention like gunshots would. They also could possibly have charges like this in their past or on their rap sheet. The killer or killers were most likely somewhere in age between their 40s and 60s by the year 2018 based on the spree's duration, which started roughly around 2001, and the killer or killers would likely blend into low charges like this in their past or on their rap sheet. The killer or killers were most likely somewhere in age between their 40s and 60s by the year 2018 based on the spree's duration, which started roughly around 2001, and the killer or killers would likely blend into low-income communities, possibly being employed as a blue-collar worker like a truck driver or a laborer familiar with alleys, abandoned buildings, and vacant lots that were frequently used for body disposal. Thomas Hargrove himself has also publicly speculated that the perpetrator might impersonate a police officer to gain trust from vulnerable women, exploiting authority to lure victims in without resistance or a fight. This profile fits serial killers who often target marginalized groups, who are often able to operate undetected due to societal indifference and police resource allocation biases. Overall, the killer or killers obviously exhibit high organizational skills and have somehow throughout all of these crimes, at least the 51 that we're talking about here, have avoided leaving any noticeable DNA evidence or just really any evidence in general behind in most of these cases, despite potential and confirmed assaults, indicating that they may use protection or gloves when they kill, alongside other precautions to make sure that there's nothing that they leave behind. Further qualities suggest that the killer is opportunistic yet ritualistic, preying on the vulnerable victims at around the same time during the nighttime in the middle of the night when the lights are low in the city and they can move in an undetectable fashion throughout isolated spots and areas within the Chicago area. The killer or killers obviously have or has some sort of preference for manual strangulation that implies that they themselves are strong. They have to have some sort of physical strength, and they probably have a desire to have an almost intimate, personal control over their victim's life and death. They may have a history of petty crimes or domestic disputes, as serial offenders often start small before escalating, and the low clearance or crime-solving rate points to a perpetrator or perpetrators being someone or someones who understand how the police typically tend to operate and investigate, especially police in these high crime areas. So they understand how the police work, and they understand how police investigate crimes, especially in these neighborhoods like Englewood and West Garfield, where it is different than downtown Chicago. They more than likely also target victims in these areas specifically because they know that police resources are already stretched incredibly thin, and they more than likely know that the police won't have as much time or manpower available to dedicate to solving these crimes if they occur in areas where murder and violent crime is already extremely common. Thomas Hargrove at one point publicly noted that the killer could be, quote, one guy or two or three guys, end quote, and also noted that there potentially could be copycat killers enveloped in this murder spree that saw the initial unsolved cases in the news and decided to commit a similar murder in an effort to have their crime linked to someone else's spree. But a primary offender or single killer likely drives or did drive the core pattern of murder and death. So even if there are copycats, there are people who saw this and decided to hop in on the action, if you want to call it that. There's more than likely at least one person that started all of this that was the source point for all this evil. Psychological traits that could potentially be attributed to the Chicago Strangler include necrophilic tendencies, as the bodies of victims were often left partially stripped and nude with signs of post-mortem activity, which also indicates that the killer or killers may receive some sort of sick gratification from the degradation, embarrassment, and humiliation of their victims even after death. The perpetrator probably resides or works near clusters like Garfield Park, which enables quick escapes and would provide the killer or killers with knowledge of surveillance gaps in the area. These are people that would probably know where they have cameras, they know how they'd get caught, they understand other people, have been caught. They were caught on camera here outside of this gas station, or maybe this school has a surveillance system that caught this one guy this one time, so they're probably hyper aware of all this because there's never been any footage or video or photos or anything that's emerged of any of these perpetrators for any of these cases. And as of 2025, no single suspect has ever been identified, but the profile matches offenders like Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, who targeted sex workers in overlooked communities, and other killers in the past that operated in Chicago like Andre Crawford and Hubert Geralds Jr., who talked about in a previous video. All of these qualities, when you look at them together, suggest that the killer may be a socially adept individual who avoids suspicion by appearing non-threatening initially, a wolf in sheepskin, someone who blends into a crowd just like anyone else. In hypothesizing a profile for the killer based on that publicly available information and previous assertions by journalists who've looked into these cases, the killer himself or killers may exhibit antisocial personality disorder with sadistic elements, deriving pleasure from the power imbalance that exists within the act of strangling these vulnerable women, often after luring them in with promises of money or drugs. The killer might even get off on this fact, and could potentially come from a background of wealth, money, or some sort of power. They also could have military or law enforcement training, per Thomas Hargrove's suggestions in interviews, which would have essentially provided them with the discipline and knowledge required to successfully evade capture for nearly 2 decades. I mean, if you're a perpetrator that's gotten away with these crimes in the modern era for so long, you have to have some sort of knowledge of how the police procedures go, how these investigations are carried out, what they look for, how they search for things in order to make all the potential evidence disappear. Mobility is key here as well, and perhaps the killer owns a vehicle for transporting bodies to dump sites like the snowdrifts or bins, which has also helped to minimize forensic traces. And they'd have to own a decently sized vehicle, I'm assuming, maybe like a truck or even like a van of some sort. Racial bias in targeting predominantly black women also possibly implies a white or non-black offender who has been going into segregated areas with intent, though none of the publicly available data could possibly confirm the killer's ethnicity. This is simply a hypothesis based on the killing sprees of other previous killers that have been captured, like Gary Heidnik, a white killer who had a house of horrors in northern Philadelphia, whose victims were all non-white women, who at the time of their abductions were vulnerable due to poverty, mental disabilities, or involvement in sex work. Gary Heidnik killed 2 of the victims, Sarah Lindsay by hanging her from a beam until she died, and Deborah Dudley by electrocution in a water-filled pit, and afterwards dismembered Lindsay's body and allegedly fed her parts to the other captives. Gary Heidnik's crimes were discovered when one survivor, Josefina Rivera, escaped and alerted authorities on March 24, 1987, which led to his arrest. There was also Jeremy Anthony Michael Skibicki, a white Canadian serial killer born on August 20th, 19 Winnipeg, Manitoba, who worked as a warehouse laborer and had a history of domestic violence, white supremacist affiliations, and mental health issues, including schizophrenia. In 2022, at age 35, he murdered 4 Indigenous women from low-income and homeless communities in Winnipeg, luring them to his apartment where he strangled or assaulted them to death before dismembering their bodies. Skibicki disposed of their remains in garbage bins and landfills, with one victim's partial remains discovered in a dumpster on May 3, 2022, leading to his arrest on May 18th of that same year after police linked him through DNA and surveillance. There's also John Martin Crawford, a white Canadian serial killer born on March 29, 1962, in Saskatchewan, who had a troubled upbringing involving abuse, early criminality involving assaults, and a prior conviction for manslaughter in 1981 at age 19 for killing Indigenous woman Mary Jane Sirloin. After serving time and being released on parole, Crawford resumed his predatory behavior, working odd jobs while battling addictions. Between 1992 and 94, he murdered 3 Indigenous women from low-income and vulnerable communities in Canada: Eva Tysop, Charlene Pope, and Kalinda Waterhen, all non-white First Nations women involved in work or facing poverty, whom he once again lured in with promises of money or drugs before assaulting and strangling them. He dumped their bodies in remote rural areas near Saskatoon, exploiting the isolation and societal indifference towards missing Indigenous women. And there were also killers like this that existed within Illinois. For example, there was Larry Bright, a white American serial killer born in 1966 in Peoria, Illinois, who grew up in a troubled family and worked as a laborer while struggling with drug addiction. Known as the Bone Crusher, he operated from July 2003 to January 2004 in Peoria, killing 8 black women from low-income neighborhoods, all involved in or drug use, whom he lured in with promises of money or narcotics to his home or isolated spots. Larry Bright strangled or suffocated his victims during or after encounters, often when they demanded payment, then burned their bodies in backyard bonfires to destroy evidence before dumping the remains in rural ditches or fields around Peoria, Illinois, or Tazewell counties. And there's also another American serial killer named Timothy Hazlitt Jr. Timothy was another white American suspected serial killer, and in 2022, at age 39, he targeted black women from low-income and homeless communities, luring them in with offers of shelter or money before assaulting them in his basement dungeon equipped with restraints and torture devices. He was eventually charged after a woman escaped from his torture chamber, but he's just another example of a white man specifically heading into these low-income areas to target black women who, unfortunately, because these people are racist and horrible people, they deem as lesser than, or like they won't be, acknowledged as quickly if they're killed and go missing. But back to the Chicago Strangler. The spree's pause around 2018 might indicate a few things. Remember, these killings, according to the data, seemed to stop in the year 2018. And like I said, this might mean a few things. A possible incarceration or stint in prison for the killer or killers may have died, or the killers or killer may have relocated, moved to another city or state due to the public's growing awareness surrounding the unsolved murders. Keep in mind, 2019 is when it was publicly announced that there was a giant task force going on, and all these people are looking into it now, and victims families had been speaking about this, and then all of a sudden it stops. So it's almost like the killer was very, very hyper aware of what was happening, and they saw that this task force was forming, and they said, nah, I'm not going to get caught. And they either stopped or left. But as I stated before, Thomas Hargrove himself has publicly warned and stated that he believes serial killers like the Chicago Strangler would simply continue on with their crimes until stopped. Qualities of the killer would also include adaptability, shifting disposal methods slightly to avoid creating an easily identifiable pattern, and the fact that they're smart enough to be able to exploit Chicago's high violence, high murder rates, and lack of police resources to blend their murders in with others in the city. Ultimately, the killer or killers himself or themselves embody systemic failures in American culture, as they've seemingly thrived in areas with underfunded policing and a lack of resources. And now let's talk about the perfect victims for this high violence, high murder rates, and lack of police resources to blend their murders in with others in the city. Ultimately, the killer or killers himself or themselves embody systemic failures in American culture, as they've seemingly thrived in areas with underfunded policing and a lack of resources. And now let's talk about the perfect victims for this killer or these killers. The killer's preferred victims were overwhelmingly black women aged 18 to 58, many of which engaged in work or were battling drug addiction at the time of their deaths, making them high-risk targets less likely to be reported missing promptly. Shared qualities between the victims include socioeconomic vulnerability, poverty, and documented histories of justice system involvement, like arrests for or drugs, which in turn reduces investigative priority. In layman's terms, essentially, the killer seems to have known that by picking to target women with criminal histories or prior run-ins with the law, when these women went missing or were reported as being AWOL, the authorities, unfortunately, wouldn't place as much priority in their investigations, knowing the victims' past and their behaviors. Geographically, the bodies accrued in clusters throughout South Side neighborhoods like Englewood and Washington Park, or West Side areas like Austin and Garfield Park. And bodies were often dumped in police districts with high violent crime rates. And the similarities between the locations where these women's bodies were dumped are astounding. 94% of the bodies were found outdoors in alleys, public parks, or snowdrifts, also in abandoned buildings. They were partially or fully stripped of their clothing, with signs of non-voluntary activity. Victims like Angela Ford, 32 years old, strangled in 2001, and Charlotte Dick, strangled in 2001, exemplify the pattern of mothers or family-oriented women who, at the time of their deaths, were deeply ensnared in the trap of addiction. Disposal of the bodies in garbage bins or abandoned buildings also seemingly served to humiliate the victims, even after death, linking to a possible degradation motif. This profile highlights intersectional vulnerabilities, race, gender, poverty, etc. Further similarities include the victims' lifestyles before death, which seemingly facilitated their isolation, such as nighttime street work and inside of high-crime areas in the city like the Stroll, which would allow the killer to lure them in without any potential witnesses. Many victims, like Myrna Walker, who was killed and dismembered in 2003, were found in garbage bags or dumpsters, indicating that their remains were transported and dumped after they were dead. In other words, most of these women were not killed in the place where they were found. Over half of the victims were discovered within a 10-mile radius on the south side of Chicago, near vacant lots or abandoned buildings, and the qualities shared amongst the victims included things like a palpable economic desperation, with some victims being things like nurses or waitresses that had unfortunately turned to work amidst active addictions. Also, a number of the victims often had children or grandchildren, which served to humanize them far beyond society's stereotypes. The murders peaked between 2001 and 2010, and often they occurred in the wintertime for snow concealment. This consistency suggests targeting based on accessibility inside of those marginalized zones. And the pattern of these murders occurring in the winter months also serves to help link the victims and a killer or killers together. Obviously, someone was targeting people at night in the wintertime. They knew where to dump them. They had preferred ways of killing. It's blatantly obvious. The parallels between the recorded victims also extends to their bodies' post-mortem treatments, with asphyxiation frequently having left ligature marks and defensive wounds being found on many of the victims' bodies, indicating that they may have struggled or fought back against their killer. Also, many of the victims, like Nicole Ridge, who was murdered in 2007, were dismissed as being high risk by the authorities, which only served to delay probes and serious investigations into their murders. In addition, the bodies of these victims were frequently found staged in the fetal position or covered in some sort of debris, which delayed their post-discovery identification. Overall, the victims varied greatly and included everyone from grandmothers to young mothers, but they were united by poverty and their race in segregated Chicago. This pattern overall reflects a much broader societal neglect, with geography tying to disinvested black neighborhoods. Overall, victims' vulnerabilities enabled this spree's longevity. We wanted answers to this madness, and I feel like I provided you with a lot of context, but at this point, we need to head to Chicago ourselves to investigate these crimes. So, in June of this year, we bought a plane ticket and headed to the city to begin our on-the-ground investigation. Right now, we're in one of the more dangerous neighborhoods here in Chicago, Illinois, chasing down the ghost of the Chicago Strangler. Now, if you follow this story, these bodies have been found all over the city, but there are certain parts of Chicago that became murder clusters. Now, in this area that we're in right now, a neighborhood that seems to be pretty decent actually, a number of bodies of victims have been discovered. For example, right here at 3522 King Drive, this building behind us used to be completely abandoned. In October of 2003, Chicago police made a disturbing discovery in the abandoned building to our right. Inside of that building, acting on a tip, they discovered the dead body of a 38-year-old woman known as Lucysette Mary Thomas. Now, Mary was a worker, a drug addict here in Chicago, and they didn't know at the time how long she had been dead or who killed her. And disturbingly, just like all the other murders that we're covering in this video, Mary's killer has never been caught, has never been brought to justice. And the mystery still remains of what exactly happened inside of this building. Was Mary killed inside of this building to our right? Was she killed somewhere else, brought here and dumped? What happened to her killer? Is her killer responsible for more murders? Those are just questions that we don't have answers to. But this just goes to show, locations move on from murder. Back in the day, this was an abandoned property, a blighted property here in this neighborhood in Chicago. And right now, as you can see, there appear to be people living out of the building. Even right here, my Minnie's home daycare. So there appears to be a daycare center operating out of this building. And no one would ever really know that the deceased corpse of a 38-year-old black woman was discovered here over 20 years ago, and that her killer is still out here somewhere. Maybe in this neighborhood, maybe not even in the city, but somewhere in the world. So what do you think about this? Like, what are your thoughts?
Wow, it's crazy. I mean, it's just like you look at this building and you would never think that anything like that happened here. Just awful. But it's just such a normal area. I don't know, it's really eerie.
Peaceful, right? Birds chirping, sunlight. What about you?
I mean, I think it goes to show how many places in America have cases that have never been solved, and it's everyday buildings, and the police aren't going to do anything to find out what happened. That's people they don't care about.
It's crazy to think that they will not acknowledge that there's a killer here. Now, after we finished filming, I filed a FOIA request for each of the victims that we attempted to shine light on in this documentary, and I achieved varying degrees of success. For those of you who don't know, a FOIA request, short for Freedom of Information Act request, is basically a way for anyone to ask the US government for copies of public records or documents held by federal agencies, like emails, reports, autopsy reports, or data, without needing a special reason. It's designed to promote transparency from within the government, but agencies can sometimes deny requests if the info involves national security, privacy, or other exemptions, and it might take time or fees to process. Now, I've FOIA'd hundreds of things over the years for my videos. I've had a lot of success. I've had agencies send me 1,000 pages of investigative notes. I've had them send me crime scene photos and all sorts of information for all sorts of different requests. I've FOIA'd the FBI, I've FOIA'd local housing authorities, I've FOIA'd governments and district attorneys. Like, I've FOIA'd a ton of individuals. So before you get into this and say that I did all this incorrectly, I very well understand the FOIA process, and I've worked with lots high, like I said, all the way down to small local authorities. So I understand what you need to write, how to file these things. And when I filed a FOIA request for information surrounding the murder of Lucy Set Mary Thomas, whose crime scene we just visited in that clip, authorities in Chicago provided me with only one document, and that was the initial case incident report. However, they denied giving me access to any other documents surrounding the murder of Lucy Set and stated, quote, "While responsive records were identified, disclosing these records would adversely impact an ongoing Chicago Police Department investigation. This case is still open and ongoing. The release at this time could potentially jeopardize the progress of the investigation. Individuals are still being interviewed, and the disclosure of these records would directly interfere with CPD's active investigation into this matter, such that their investigation is compromised if witnesses who are actively being interviewed are able to review the materials in CPD's possession, including but not limited to the statements of other witnesses, accused, and reporting parties." End quote. Like I said, documents relating to unsolved murders are released by authorities all the time. There's so many FOIA, thousands, hundreds of thousands of FOIA requests surrounding murders, specifically like these over the years, that have been fulfilled. Over the last few years, like I said, I've sent hundreds of FOIA requests, and at times I've received document dumps from police departments that have included thousands of pages of documentation, and even at times thousands of photographs. However, me personally, I find CPD's reasoning to be a little bit dishonest here. Saying that they're still interviewing individuals associated with Lucy Set's murder, I personally believe to be a little more than unbelievable. I mean, this is an unsolved murder from 2003, almost 22 years ago. And the key word here is unsolved. I couldn't find any information online about there being any recent arrests in the case, any investigation being open on I couldn't even find any news articles talking about this victim for decades. I don't believe that they're still actively interviewing subjects in this case or aggressively following up on leads. I mean, if you listen to that statement from CPD, it really makes it sound like they've got detectives out there right now talking to people, interviewing people, bringing justice for this victim. That's what the wording makes it sound like. But what I do believe is that they don't want to admit that these murders obviously just might be connected. They don't want to release this information to people. I believe sometimes that authorities hold this stuff back because they don't want people doing their work for them. I mean, the police is like a fraternal brotherhood type of thing where there's weird power dynamics and a hierarchy, and it's a very, very weird world, having known like a family member that was in that world. I mean, it's really weird. And when you go down all these different rabbit holes and investigations and read all these stories, oftentimes authorities or departments will purposefully leave cases open so that they don't have to fulfill FOIA requests, even though they could, close it or do whatever they do behind the scenes to clear some of these documents for release. They don't give it. And even in this case, it's like the autopsy report. An autopsy report would be great on so many of these victims so that you could actually start digging into the pattern. And I know that family members of these victims have been requesting this stuff, and they've been very, very angry that even they, as the family members, can't get any information from the police. And yeah, I just feel like it's dishonest to say that they're still actively investigating all of these murders when, there's multiple murders every day in Chicago that they have to investigate. And as you'll see, this was a pattern throughout all of the FOIA requests that I filed. However, they did send me that initial case report, so as kind of worthless as it really is, let's just take a look. As you can see, there isn't a lot of information on this report. Literally the word unknown or UNK written all over the document. However, the narrative from the report is as follows. Quote, in summary, responding officers responded to above address on a person call. Upon arrival, b2w2 related to ROs or responding officers that above witness flagged him down and stated there was a body in the garage. CFO responded to scene and AMB 33 engine 45, I don't know if I'm reading this correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong, and found no vital signs. Victim had trauma and bleeding to the head area. Victim was also partially clothed. They then state that the medical examiner pronounced the victim dead on scene and go through some other routine details about, who was there, who processed the scene, the technicians, yada yada. But what else exists in relation to this case? I mean, this clearly can't be all the information that they have, right? I mean, this report tells us practically next to nothing. And like I said before, I just find it incredibly hard to believe that the Chicago Police Department is still aggressively investigating this murder of to them, random woman from over 20 years ago. They shut down the task force years ago, and there have been zero updates in these murders ever since. However, I'm going to make these documents public and upload them to a Google Drive link that I'll post in the description of this video so that you guys can look them over yourselves and draw your own conclusions. Maybe you'll see something in these documents that I missed, you never know. However, we knew that we had to continue on our search, and so we continued on our journey through the dark underbelly of Chicago. Another murder that rocked this neighborhood in Chicago was that of 42-year-old resident Charlotte Day. Now, Charlotte was a black woman just like everybody else in this string of murders, and interestingly enough, we just spoke with some residents of this neighborhood, and they said that they actually remember this thing happening. They said her body was found right here in this vacant lot, and that she would not have been somebody from this neighborhood necessarily, and that they didn't believe that the person who would have targeted her would have been from here. The concept being that what we were just told, everybody around here knows everybody. The man we were just speaking with said that it's a very tight-knit community. Everybody looks out for each other and cares for each other. So if somebody were to have done this, which they did, they wouldn't have been from around here.
We all close. All us in our 40s now. We've been around here.
Yeah, because I was 21 at that time. That's why I'm like, I don't remember
Really?
that.
We like the third, fourth generation. So.
Yeah, so
Hey,
no
my
one would
grandma-
hurt
this
someone
my grandma business.
from around here. It's
Been
around
around
here.
here since the
Yeah.
60s. I think my
Exactly.
grandma that moved out here about 60s. Yeah, they do. They cover up a lot of when the people get found.
Well, it's, easy for the cops to say, oh, she was just a drug addict or a
worker, you know, and then they don't
He
even have
definitely
to
never
look at
had
it.
no stroll right up through here, so she wasn't no worker from over here.
Somebody probably.
Yeah, that's what they think, is that someone's coming or came and just dumped people.
In the area.
Not here.
Right,
There's
but in the
3
area.
here in this kind of square area that we were just like 2 streets over. There was someone that was found in 2002 in an abandoned building, or 2003. Her name was.
That's down there on Homan, right? Like heroin or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. She was a teenager.
Yeah, she was.
You got a real good memory.
Yeah, damn, man.
Oh, she was related to somebody I knew. That's why.
Oh, I'm
that's
sorry
my
to hear
homie,
that.
her sister. Yeah.
Now, you can look at the map and you can see just how many bodies have been found here in Chicago that the police never cared to investigate. They've never connected to each other. But as you go down this list and visit these dumping sites, you can see the patterns. There are so many women whose bodies were found in vacant lots, just like this one. Bodies that were found in garbage cans set on fire. Bodies that were discovered in abandoned buildings. So clearly, this killer or group of killers had some sort of an MO. Garbage cans set on fire. Bodies that were discovered in abandoned buildings. So clearly, this killer or group of killers had some sort of an MO and some sort of a pattern to what they were doing here. But as with every single case that we're going to cover on today's episode, Charlotte's murder remains unsolved and uninvestigated. So that last shot and that last segment that we did, literally, you can see the vacant lot from where we're standing right now. We're just a couple 100 feet away. But a few years later, in September of 2006, this building behind me was the scene of another ghoulish discovery. Inside of this building, which was at the time vacant, investigators found the body of 34-year-old Kelly Sarf. Now, what's interesting though about this is that Kelly was a white woman, but she received the same amount of justice and effort from the Chicago Police Department as all of the others. Kelly's murder was never solved. And as we saw in the first clip that we filmed in this area, the building behind us is no longer vacant. It's clearly been renovated. There's most likely individuals living inside of the building, but the murder that took place inside is still unsolved. And it really does make you wonder, especially when you start going down the list, visiting these places, boom, 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 why they never thought to actually solve any of these crimes. I know that it's hard, and I know that in a city like Chicago, their resources are already going to be stretched thin, but when you have so many women murdered with similar MOs and patterns, I mean, Kelly was strangled just like everybody else that we've talked about so far, and they refuse to acknowledge any pattern. That's when it becomes deeply problematic, and you start to realize that at least one, if not multiple monsters got away with these crimes. And like you were saying, this is like a nice little neighborhood, right?
It's so nice, and the people are super friendly, and you just can't imagine that we're just like feet down from where the last murder was. So it's just crazy.
Yeah, it's hard to believe.
Hard to believe.
And eerily, I believe she was found in the basement, and you can kind of see there's a little door that leads down there. But we are going to be investigating some of these locations. Did you hear that? Something backfiring? I don't know. So many secrets. And it's always bizarre, too, to be here investigating these things on a bright, sunny summer day. The happiest of days, beautiful weather, terrible stories. And like I said, I feel like I should be saying now, back to you.
So as you can see, there were 2 more victims in that immediate area that were discovered literally 100 or so feet from one another, and both murders to this day remain unsolved. I mean, we were talking to people on the street there who remembered when the body was found and how pissed they were. I actually didn't get the audio of the guy, but he was talking about the fact one of the people that we spoke with across the street from the first scene actually was saying, I wish I would have recorded him saying this because it was so interesting to have for a record, but he told us when I went up and asked him, like, do you have any idea who this might have been that killed this woman? And he said that he knew for a fact that whoever killed that woman, at least in that case, wasn't somebody from their community. He was describing this neighborhood and everybody on this block, like they knew the victim, and he said everybody around here knows everybody, and for years, decades, we've all looked out for each other. I mean, this murder was almost, I believe, 20 years ago, and they all remembered it when I was talking to them. And he said, like, this wouldn't be somebody amongst us. Like, We know anything and everything that happens here. So he hypothesized that someone had come into the community and dropped the body or abducted the victim and committed the murder. But regardless, how unlikely is this? Two unsolved murders with incredibly similar MOs occurring a few hundred feet from each other, down the road from one another, both dumped in abandoned empty areas, and they aren't connected at all? I personally have a hard time believing that that's true. However, wanting to dig even deeper, I fired off FOIA requests to the Chicago PD for information relating to both of these murders. And once again, I received similar responses, but one of these responses was incredibly bizarre. As you can see in this letter sent to me by the Chicago Police Department, they responded to my FOIA request with the following. Quote, "The Chicago Police Department, CPD, is in receipt of your Freedom of Information Act FOIA request for the following. Any and all information relating to the murder of a woman named Charlotte W. Day, found at or near 3432 West Monroe, age 42, on 3/28/2001. I'm requesting all documents, video and audio recordings, photos, and reports related to this case. Your request was reviewed by CPD and a search conducted in relevant CPD databases utilizing the provided search parameters. Search results returned as negative. Therefore, CPD has no responsive records to your request as it is stated." End quote. Now, this is incredibly bizarre to me. Keep in mind, there's more info that I gave them. That's just a little snippet from my initial request. And it's very similar to every other request. I pretty much used the same details, just like I've done and so many other people have done with so many other FOIA requests, where I gave them the victim's full essentially name, the address where the body was found, the date when the body was found, the age, and they're actually trying to say that there's no record of this body even being found. There's no records relating to this woman's murder at all that exists within CPD. They're not saying, oh, we found responsive records, meaning records that correlate, and we're not going to release them to you. They're actually saying in that letter, we couldn't find a single record that matches that crime. How's that possible? I mean, on every single website and in every news article and stories about these deaths and these women, including on websites that you can go look at for yourself, like the Chicago Reader, Unforgotten51.com, and more, Charlotte W. Day is listed as being a victim of these crimes who was found at that exact address that I provided on that exact date. I mean, this information is easily verifiable. So obviously, Charlotte W. Day's body was found there and she had been killed. It's in all these reports, family members that have spoken up, and yet officially in the Chicago Police Department's records, she doesn't exist. So what exactly is going on here? How did the Chicago Police not have any responsive records relating to the discovery of Charlotte's body or her murder? No autopsy report, no case incident report, no police reports, no investigative notes, nothing. So were these files or records lost? Were they destroyed? At best, in my opinion, this displays gross negligence on the part of the Chicago PD. And at worst, it shows a blatant disregard for these victims and potentially intentional either loss or destruction of important records relating to an unsolved murder case. It's incredibly bizarre that they have no records in relation to the discovery of this body. Like I said, they don't even have a case report that details the conditions under which the body was found. There's no narrative of what happened. But without any information, we can hypothesize and theorize all day, but we have to move on here. And this is just a weird contrast, because when it comes to my FOIA request for information surrounding the murder of Kelly Sarf, who was found just down the street from Charlotte, I had a minor success. The Chicago PD actually did send me the original case report generated about the discovery of Kelly's body, but once again, they provided me with no additional information. And once again, they used the same excuse to deny the FOIA request, stating, quote, "Please be advised that any other records are denied. This is an ongoing investigation and any records pertaining to this case are exempt pursuant to FOIA under exemption blah blah blah, which allows a public body to withhold records that would interfere with pending or actually and reasonably contemplated law enforcement proceedings conducted by the law enforcement or correctional agency that received the FOIA request. Furthermore, under section blah 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 blah, a law enforcement agency may withhold records to the extent disclosure would obstruct an ongoing criminal investigation by the agency that is the recipient of the request. While responsive records were identified, disclosing these records would adversely impact an ongoing Chicago Police Department investigation. In order to ascertain whether your request would interfere with an ongoing investigation, the matter was forwarded to the department's Bureau of Detectives, which advised that the releasing of any records could interfere and possibly obstruct the investigation and proceedings at this time." End quote. I get it. I know that there are some individuals online that dislike me and my videos that are going to try and clip this and claim that Colin's trying to interfere with police investigations and that's proof why they don't release these records and blah blah blah, and they're going to take my words and say that I'm trying to mess with the investigations and do horrible things and blah blah. But I'm not saying that they should just dump all of the information. I'm saying that I don't believe them when they state that they are still working an active investigation in the case of Kelly Sarf, along with active investigations in the cases of women in this series of murders. It would be impossible to have extremely thorough investigations be active surrounding every unsolved murder in the history of Chicago at the same time. I mean, imagine how many murders that is. I mean, there are more unsolved murders that have happened in the city than one could possibly count. And also, you have victims' family members that are begging for this information to become public. I mean, people really don't even understand. Nobody really knows. A lot of these people don't understand what happened to their own family members. I mean, it's deeply disturbing stuff. And the families themselves could use this information to help raise awareness, or groups like the Murder Accountability Project could use that information to create more profiles and aid the police in their work, but they're keeping tight lips. Now, if they manage to solve this case in the next few years, more power to them, and I'm glad that they denied me the records. But sadly and unfortunately, I just don't believe that they're going to solve these cases, and I just don't believe that they're actively investigating them. In addition, there have been family members of those victims, like I said, that have for years been begging CPD to release any documents surrounding the murders of their loved ones, and to this day, they haven't received that information. Why exactly? I don't know. I understand not wanting to give perpetrators a tip-off, not interfering with an investigation, not wanting to taint victims or witness statements, but in so many cases, they just slap an open investigation title onto things like this to ensure that people legally can't get access to these files for one reason or another. And for example, I don't know why it would hurt for investigators to release toxicology reports or autopsy reports or other documentation surrounding any of these crimes so that people could take a look at all of this themselves and make their own determinations. I mean, currently, to show you the parallels here, over there in a suitcase, I have a document dump in my possession of over 5,000 pages of investigative notes and reports and documents relating to the unsolved Oakland County child killings in Detroit. Thousands upon thousands of pages of redacted documents and reports dealing with multiple unsolved murders, unfortunately of children. Those murders are not solved. They've never been solved. And yet the police in that case have dumped tons of information into the public domain so that family members, private investigators, and others can conduct their own investigations. And so that news stations and independent journalists can broadcast details and help to raise awareness, like I aim to do with these videos. I just find it very odd. For a case that's had zero movement publicly in the last 6 years, that before that had zero movement for almost 20 years, they're claiming that these investigations are all still active and ongoing, which I personally just don't believe. Now, you can debate that all day, and I know some people are going to disagree with that, but I don't think that that's happening. But when it comes to Kelly though, at least they gave me a case report. So let's take a look. As you can see, once again, there are a lot of unknowns or UNKs on this report, and a lot of information that remains unknown. Quote, in summary, ROs or responding officers responded to person down. Upon arrival, victims, Sarf Kelly, body was discovered in basement room of abandoned building. Victim was laying on back with shirt, no clothing from waist down, and 2 blankets around the ankles. Victim had bruising around the neck and blood flow coming out of mouth on right side. Witness number 1 and witness number 2 related that they had not seen victim for 3 to 4 days, at which time victim had no scarring/bruising around the neck. Witness number 1 discovered victim's body and notified witness number 2, who attempted to wake her by shaking her. End quote. And that's about it. That's all the information that the police would release about the murder of Kelly Sarf. They wouldn't and won't release the autopsy report, any further investigative notes, or really just any information on this case in general, which, as you can see, is clearly extremely infuriating, not only for myself and others who care about these cases and trying to find justice in them, but I can only imagine for victims' family members as well, who've been left wondering for almost 2 full decades now what the hell happened to their loved one and who possibly did this to them. They also haven't ever released any photographs from the scene or really any details in general from most of these crimes, which is just a little strange to me. Even almost 20 years on, it seems like the Chicago PD is remaining extremely tight-lipped when it comes to these cases. They don't want to talk about them, and they certainly don't want others talking about them either. And the sad thing is, when it comes to a lot of these women, there's barely information about them online at all, period. There aren't even photographs of the women to remember them by. It's just, as simply as I can put it, very sad. It seems like no authorities ever seem to really care about them, and they still don't. But alas, we need to move on. And our investigation throughout the city only got darker and darker, the further down the rabbit hole that we traveled.
So, a lot of these cases that we're covering in today's video happened in the past, in the somewhat far past, like 2001, 2003, 2004. But people fail to remember that this killer or killers was or were active until roughly 2018. Now, there are some people who believe that they struck and killed even after that, but right behind me in this kind of area, I don't know exactly where the body was found. In 2017, June 22nd, 2017, the body of a woman named Catherine Satterfield Buchanan was discovered lying in the parkway of this area. So, Catherine was once again the same type of woman. She was black. She had been strangled. She had been somewhat brutalized before she was killed. But what makes this case very interesting is that Catherine was actually 58 years old. Unlike a lot of these other victims who were younger, Catherine was almost in her 60s. And interestingly enough, there is another victim that we're going to visit and her site in this area who was also a little bit more advanced in their age. But I think it's interesting, you know, killers will switch up their MOs, they'll switch up their victim profiles, they'll switch up the people that they're targeting in order to throw off law enforcement. And that seems to be what happened here with Catherine's murder, because just like with everybody else, her murder to this day remains unsolved. And I think we're gonna do a little spirit box here and see if we can gather any information before moving on. So right now we're just trying to speak to any energies that may be here in this immediate area. We're gonna be asking questions about the death of a woman named Catherine, whose body was found in this area in 2017. So if you know anything about this murder or what happened to Catherine, can you please say yes or I'm here? A cop, I heard right away. Did you hear that?
Never seen again.
Follow them. Did you see the person who dumped Catherine's body out here? My boss? 45. That would fit the age range. Said white. I thought it said white too.
Was it just one person?
6 or 7. Are you saying one person was responsible for 6 or 7 of the killings? Visiting, I heard. So this guy didn't live around here? Only one of them.
Waiting.
Can you give us any clues as to the person that dumped the body here if you saw it? You know, weirdly enough, I feel something like a just kind of tingle here. So you're saying it was a 45-year-old white man, basically? Yes, it is. Can you say the name of the person who was found here so we know you know what you're talking about? Suspect. Anything else you can tell us?
Does this guy come back to the scene?
He's gone.
Can you give us a name?
57.
Anything else?
Do you know why he picked this spot? Because I was attacked?
Is there anyone here that needs help?
So it's interesting because it says, or it sounded like it said 45 white, which would go against what profilers have stated they believe the suspect would be. All the discourse I've read about this case claims that the person was, or persons were most likely black themselves. So I think that's very interesting. And it's actually pretty crazy. There was a case that I read about a little while ago about a guy that was arrested in a Chicago neighborhood who had essentially a machine gun in his white van, hundreds of spent shell casings, and writings about wanting to commit a mass shooting. And I've read these theories online that there are racist white individuals that essentially hunt minorities in Chicago, and that the PD almost looks the other way when it comes to these crimes. I mean, the guy was arrested and with all that stuff at a predominantly, like, in a predominantly black neighborhood. He was a white guy. So that's a really weird news story. So I don't know what to make of that, but I will say, just doing this spirit box right now, it's like hard to imagine in all of these cases, like a dead woman's body just sitting here. She's almost 60, lived a full life, and some sick ended that life and just dumped her like trash amongst the other trash. It's hard to believe, but that's the human part of these cases and why we do this, because her murder is still unsolved. Every single one that we're talking about in this video is unsolved.
She was really close to my age, so that could have been me. And it's hard to believe. Just had a family probably somewhere, and sad.
I just think it's really strange how this is like a very populated area. I mean, there's people all on the streets, and this is a weekday too. So, I mean, just thinking like someone came out here at night and just like probably parked where we parked, took the body out, dumped it right here, and then just took off. It's so strange to think of. Like, you can almost like see what happened.
And why choose these locations? That's my biggest question, I guess, especially even with this. Why this area right here? Is there a pattern to the placement of these bodies? Because this guy or guys, he isn't necessarily killing them right here. They're choosing these spots to dump the corpses. So, I don't know. But we still need to keep on going.
Now, there was a lot of interesting information there. Some information that pointed to a potential white suspect. I actually ran some questions and hypothesis and information through AI and asked if it could be a white killer, and it said, yeah, I mean, evidence could point to a white or non-black killer who's specifically targeting these black women. Someone with like a business connection or something like that, I don't know. There was a lot of information there. And I do want to state here and be perfectly crystal clear. Once again, throughout these investigations, and really any investigation that we perform in relation to a true crime case, we are not attempting to contact the spirits of victims in specific. We're trying to treat this with as much respect and care and empathy from our hearts and souls as possible. And if you can't tell that a lot of time, effort, care, and research is put into the productions of videos like this one, I don't know what to tell you. I've spent months now digging into these cases and trying to find information, and I've just kept hitting dead end after dead end. Now, I personally genuinely 100% believe in the methods that we use on this channel in all of our videos to attempt to speak with what some people call spirits, what I like to think of as energies. You don't have to believe in the same things that we do, and I'm not forcing you to. In addition, I want to make it very, once again, crystal clear that the answers that we receive in these investigations should in no way, shape, or form be evidence that we believe could be used for any actual prosecution or legitimate answer to a question. What we do in our videos are simply experiments. I'm not promising you that these are all real, legitimate communications with some sort of energy, but these are indeed experiments that we treat with respect and care, and we put good intentions behind them. Experiments that I, my entire family, we fully believe in. Do not construe any of the answers that we gather throughout our investigations as something that we are presenting as full-on evidence or as details that we are attempting to enter into the canon of investigative reports when it comes to cases like these. These are questions that I believe we need to be asking, that we're actually heading out and asking for ourselves. I just want that to be explicitly clear. I'm doing this because I genuinely care about these people, and I get really pissed off when I see that the government has so many people over. Lazy police forces, corruption within these departments and agencies, all of that really gets me upset because of personal things that I've seen in my life, people that I've known, things that have happened, and a deep study of these cases. So many books that I've read, so many researchers and investigative journalists I've worked with, so many FOIA requests, so many nights digging through all of these old documents and reports and reading and taking this all in. It just really pisses me off. So these videos serve, in my mind, to raise awareness surrounding these crimes, and we're asking these questions because we're genuinely curious and we want to help push, especially in this case, these crimes back into the public eye. Because at this point, it seems like a lot of individuals have forgotten about the Chicago Strangler and have forgotten about these poor women that were murdered brutally, never received justice. Now, when it comes to my FOIA request for these records relating to the murder of Catherine Satterfeld Buchanan, something bizarre happens here. As you can see, I submitted my FOIA request for records relating to Catherine's murder on July 8th, 2025. Then 9 days later, it's supposed to be within 5 days, but I'll forget that. On 7/18/25, the Chicago PD responded saying that they're extending the request for an additional 5 days, as they may need to gather a large amount of records. However, 5 days from that date would have been 7/23/25. It's now August 11th on the day that I'm recording this, almost 3 weeks later after that extension date, and they have not responded or given me an update at all in relation to these records, which I'm not too read up on the actual specifics and specificity of FOIA law, but I believe this could be a violation of FOIA. I mean, they're supposed to be given that window to respond to you, and they have to respond within that window. If they extend it, you have to give them that grace, and I'm willing to give them the grace. But they haven't responded at all. They've gone way past the extension window that they said, and they haven't even told me anything. I mean, honestly, you're seeing it right here. It's like they completely forgot about my request. I mean, the other requests that I filed on the exact same day, I did these one after each other. Those other requests were fulfilled pretty promptly, like a few days, week or so later. But this request, it was seemingly forgotten. And so I have no further updates to give you guys about this case in specific. However, if I do receive the records before this video is actually released, I will include them and record a short clip discussing those disclosures. But once again, this shows to me a failure from within the Chicago PD. I mean, here they are, actually seeming to forget about a FOIA request, or at least forgetting to follow up with the requester. Does this show a lack of care to you, or is that just me? I don't know. It just seems like they still don't really care about these women, and they don't care about getting the information surrounding these unsolved murders out to the public. I mean, maybe someone, I'm not even saying myself, someone out there, an investigative journalist or a private investigator, would be able to see or recognize some information and maybe help identify a killer or a profile. Or maybe someone would be able to just help out with the case in general. I don't know. It's just really strange. I've never had the authorities respond like that to a FOIA request where they literally just seem to forget about it. But we have to move on.
Just a few minutes away from that last scene, in 2014, another disturbing discovery was made in this neighborhood in Chicago. This time in an alleyway right here to my left, the body of 50-year-old black woman Velma Howard was discovered. Now, Velma was, just like all the others, a black woman, a worker, and was strangled to death. And just like with all of the other cases that we're investigating here, Velma's death is, to this day, still unsolved. And I want you to contrast all of these murders to the attention received in cases like that of Gabby Petito or the Idaho murders. So many of these cases receive such national attention. It captures the interest of millions of people. They follow these cases and they want justice for the victims. But in Chicago especially, no one's matching any of that energy. And there goes a Chicago police officer right there, right when I'm saying that. And the energy isn't even reciprocated by the Chicago police themselves. I mean, there's been no effort to solve any of these murders, and Velma was 50 years old. She had lived a full life, she had family members that loved her, and yet she's treated like everybody else in this story. Just another number on a sheet of paper. And it's deeply disturbing stuff. But at the end of the day, all we can do is hope and pray for justice for some of these people. Maybe one day something will happen. But we've still got a lot more sites to visit, and I want you guys to keep in mind that even at the end of this video, but there's over 75 in this series of murders. 75 in person, if you imagine that. Places where bodies have been dumped to be found by someone who's never been caught. If this case was cracked, this would mean this was one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. And yet nobody's talking about it. Nothing's been done about it. And it seems like even here in Chicago, people we've been talking to on the street in this neighborhood, they don't even know about it. June 25th, 2010, in West Garfield, Chicago. The body of a woman is found unresponsive in an alleyway right next to where we're standing right now. Eventually, investigators would piece things together and discover that the body had belonged to a 43-year-old woman named LaFonda Sue Wilson. Just like all the other black women whose bodies had been found in Chicago over the past 10 or so years, LaFonda had also been strangled to death and dumped. Now, as with all of these cases, the murders, assumedly, are not taking place at the locations where the bodies are being discovered. However, the killer obviously has to come to these areas to dump the bodies. But this is just like all the others. Except this time, what's a little bit striking about this location is that the area is more industrial. There are meatpacking plants and butcher shops, and obviously you can see the pallets behind me. Businesses all over this area. And yet, the killer or killers chose this location as a body dumping site on that fateful day in June of 2010. So while we're here, we're gonna do a spirit box session and see what we can capture. Based on our last session, we got information that the killer may have been 45, white, and had other attributes. So let's just ask. On June 25th, 2010, a black woman's body was found here. Does anybody in this area remember seeing that? If you're a spirit or an energy, we can see you.
It's been tried.
Is that? Oh my God, a train? Can't even hear the spirit box. Do you remember seeing that body being dumped here?